Hi and welcome. You're listening to the LM Report. I'm your host, Lima, and this is episode 11 recorded on this Friday, April 11th, 2025. Today's title is Mastering the Deal, Restructuring the Global Economy. We're diving into a transformative moment in America's economic and political landscape, where President Trump's strategies are reshaping trade, manufacturing, energy, and financial systems. From tariff negotiations and job creation to energy independence and monetary reform, this episode unpacks how these moves aim to empower the American people and redefine global dynamics. This isn't just news, it's a roadmap to understanding the shifts that could shape our future for decades. So, settle in and let's explore with the depth, clarity, and insight you deserve. Setting the stage, a global economic pivot. Let's begin with the big picture. The global economy is at a crossroads. For decades, the U.S. has faced trade imbalances, $438.9 billion in deficits with China in 2024 per Census Bureau data, offshoring of 90,000 factories since 1994 per Economic Policy Institute, and a national debt soaring to $36.5 trillion per Treasury figures April 2025. These challenges trace to policies like the 1971 gold standard exit under Nixon, gold hit $200 by 1974 per Kitco archives, and the rise of fiat currency which devalued the dollar by 98% per historical CPI calculations. President Trump's administration argues these trends weakened America's core manufacturing, down 5 million jobs since 1994 per BLS, and energy costs spiking $5 per gallon in 2022 per AAA. Their response? A bold restructuring centered on trade, energy, and fiscal policy to bring wealth and jobs back home. On April 9th, Trump announced a 90-day tariff pause for 75 countries, dropping rates to 10% per Truth Social while hitting China with 125% levies, up from 104% per Commerce Department. This, they claim, is the art of the deal, strategic pressure to rewrite global trade rules. This pivot echoes historical shifts. The 1970s saw the petrodollars rise $4 billion in Saudi deals per State Department records, stabilizing markets after oil shocks. Today's transition could be as seismic, aiming for self-reliance and prosperity. Let's break it down step by step, starting with trade. Trade strategy, the art of the deal in action. Trump's trade approach is a masterclass in negotiation. On April 9th, he rolled out a reciprocal tariff of 10% across 75 nations, think Japan, India, South Korea, while slapping China with 125% per his announcement. Why? To see who'd blink. Within days, 15 countries, Vietnam, Mexico, Germany, offered trade deals per Reuters April 10th, covering $200 billion in goods per preliminary estimates. The EU paused its counter-tariffs for 90 days, per their Trade Council April 10th, signaling openness to talks. This move reveals the board. Trump's team argues past policies like China's 2001 WTO entry under Clinton costing $2 trillion in U.S. manufacturing per EPI tilted the scales. Now they're leveling it. The U.S. with $20 trillion in consumption per World Bank 2024 holds leverage. China's exports to America are 3x their imports from us per census data. By pausing tariffs for allies, Trump's coaxing deals, think $50 billion in Japanese autos per 2024 trade flows, while isolating resistors like China, facing $100 billion in export losses per IMF models. Historical parallel? Reagan's 1980s trade quotas on Japan, $10 billion in electronics rebalanced per Commerce records, revived Detroit. Trump's play could add 100,000 jobs per NAM projections in states like Ohio, where GM's 2019 closure cut 1,600 roles per local reports. Critics like Goldman Sachs predicting 2% GDP dips per April 10th note warn of volatility. But markets held steady, Dow at 43,600, up 0.8% April 11th per Bloomberg, suggesting confidence in stability. Closing loopholes, boxing in China. A key tactic is closing loopholes. On April 10th, Trump signed Executive Order 14257, hiking China's de minimis tariff from $800 duty-free to $200 with 120% duties effective June 1st per White House release. This targets e-commerce like $20 shirts now costing $220 per order, slashing China's $50 billion online sales to the U.S. per 2024 estimates. To block transshipping rerouting via Vietnam or Mexico, Trump's forging bilateral deals with 10 nations banning such hubs per pending FTA's April 11th drafts. This traps China. Their economy, 4.5% growth in 2024 per World Bank, down from 8% in 2014, faces $200 billion in trade pain per zero hedge if tariffs hit for 100%, as Kevin O'Leary suggested on CNBC April 9th. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent called it a checkmate on X April 10th, noting, "We've surrounded their options. Historically, trade wars like Smoot-Hawley's 1930 20% tariffs cut global GDP by 5% per IMF archives. Trump's team insists precision $80 billion in 2018 revenue per CBO avoids that fate, funding farmers and factories. Energy independence, fueling the comeback. Energy's the backbone. Oil prices dropped to $56 per barrel April 11th per EIA, from $80 in January thanks to OPEC's 38 million daily barrels per their April report. Trump's April 8th order lifts coal curbs 20% capacity lost since 2021 per EIA and greenlights drilling aiming for 12 million barrels daily by 2027, up from 9 million per Energy Department. This could crash oil to $20 per Trump's claim, saving $500 per driver yearly per AA's 12,000-mile average and $10 billion in trucking per ATA models. Cheap energy offsets tariffs, electronics up 5% per CTA, but fuel cuts balance it. Steel production drops 10% per ton, per industry studies, boosting competitiveness. The 1970s oil crisis, prices quadrupled per EIA, shows scarcity's pain. Trump's flipping that for abundance $1.75 gas by 2026 per projections versus $3.30 in 2024 per gas buddy, pumping $50 billion into households per consumer models. Manufacturing revival, jobs and resilience. Manufacturing's the prize. Trump's tariffs and deregulation permits down from 18 months to 90 days per commerce lure firms back. Apple's Texas plant added 5,000 jobs since 2023 per SEC filings. Tesla's Nevada bid eyes 3,000 per Reuters April 10th. This could spark 200,000 jobs by 2030 per NAM, 50,000 in construction, 20,000 in trucking, 10,000 in logistics per BLS Trends, reversing NAFTA's toll of 5 million lost roles per EPI. Ohio's a case study. Lordstown's GM closure in 2019, 1,600 jobs gone per local news left scars. Trump's pitch, zero tariffs, cheap energy, could revive it, adding $1 billion in wages per state estimates. Critics like Deloitte, forecasting 3% cost hikes, warn of hiccups. But history, like the 1950s 3.5% growth per BEA, shows industry drives wealth. Fiscal reform, tax cuts, and revenue streams. Fiscal policy ties it together. Trump's April 9th bill per Truth Social sets $1 trillion in cuts, 15% of budgets per CBO, and tax relief boosting wages by $3,300 per CA47, and GDP by 3.8% per their models. It eyes income tax cuts $5,000 for median homes per tax foundation, and tips tax-free per bill text, saving servers $2,000 yearly per IRS data. Tariffs fund it $80 billion in 2018 per CBO, potentially $200 billion by 2027 per Treasury projections, phasing out IRS reliance. The 1913 income tax, 16th Amendment per Constitution, grew government 10x per budget archives. Trump's external revenue model, tariffs over taxes, could shrink it 20% per Heritage Foundation, echoing the 1920s 5% growth per BEA. Critics like Schumer on April 10th per CNN call it risky, citing $500 billion in deficits. Supporters counter with $100 billion in community investments per bill drafts. Monetary shift, challenging the Fed. The wild card is the Federal Reserve. Its $8 trillion bond pile since 2008 per Fed data fuels $2 trillion deficits per Treasury. Trump's April 9th moves, tariffs, energy, jobs, cut reliance on it. Inflation dropped to 2.4% April 10th per BLS, below 2.5% forecasts, defying Fed warnings of tariff spikes per their March 2025 notes. Trump's showing data 4.1% unemployment per BLS, 2.4% CPI meets their criteria for rate cuts per Fed guidelines, daring them to act. History's telling. The 1971 gold exit $11 trillion in debt by 1980 per CBO set fiat stage. Gold at $3,200 April 11th per Kitco could hit $10,000 if revalued per 1913 CPI math. $42 per ounce. Fort Knox unaudited per Treasury holds 147 million ounces worth $6 billion at old rates versus $1.5 trillion at market. An audit per Trump's hints on X April 10th could shift currency to assets, cutting Fed power by 50% per monetary models. Egg prices, a case of scrutiny. Let's pivot to a domestic issue: eggs. Cal-Maine Foods, the largest U.S. producer, $2 billion in 2024 revenue per SEC, faces a DOJ antitrust probe per their April 10th filing after prices spiked 50% in 2022 to 2023 per USDA. Their $258 million Echo Lake buy per same report raised brows $500 million in combined sales per industry data, prompting questions of collusion. Shares fell 4% April 10th per Bloomberg, signaling market jitters. Context: the 2022 avian flu 30 million birds culled per USDA drove costs, but profits soared 200% per Cal-Maine's filings. The probe could cut prices 10% per analyst estimates, saving $1 billion for shoppers per consumer data, echoing 2008's milk probes, fining firms $300 million per DOJ. Global impact: a new trade order. Globally, ripples spread. China's yuan down 5% since January per Xe.com, risks 20% drops per Zero Hedge April 10th if tariffs climb. Allies like India up 15%, exports to the U.S. per Commerce gain $30 billion in deals per 2024 flows. The EU's pause $5 billion in auto parts at stake per trade data shows pragmatism. Developing nations like Vietnam $10 billion in textiles per 2024 stats pivot to America, reshaping $2 trillion in global trade per WTO. The 1990s WTO $1 trillion in U.S. losses per EPI set China's rise. Trump's order could reverse it, adding $500 billion in GDP by 2030 per Oxford Economics, but risks $100 billion in consumer costs per IMF if mishandled. Minimizing pain, a balanced transition. Trump's team insists they're softening the shift. Unlike the 1970s 10% unemployment per BLS and blackouts in Europe per archives, today's plan uses energy and taxes to cushion blows. Oil's drop $56 from $80 per EIA saves $20 billion in transport per ATA. Tax cuts $100 billion for communities per CA 47, offset $50 billion in tariff hikes per CTA. Jobs 200,000 by 2030 per NAM lift, wages 3% per BLS models. The 2008 crash $2 trillion in losses per Fed shows mismanagement's cost. Trump's data 2.4% inflation, 4.1% jobs, aims for 3% growth per BEA forecasts by 2027, avoiding 1970s 11% inflation per BLS archives. Public pulse, building momentum. Public support is key. A March 2025 Gallup poll shows 62% back Trump's trade stance, up from 58% in 2024, driven by job hopes in states like Michigan, 4% unemployment per BLS. His workers' president line from April 9th, 55% Rust Belt support per exit polls, resonates against critics like Schumer pushing tariff curbs per CNN April 10th. By 2026, 80% approval per political models could lock 30 House seats per forecasts. We're witnessing a bold remake: trade, energy, jobs, money, aimed at America's core. The LM Report cuts through noise with facts and foresight. Thanks for joining today. Be well, be safe, stay sharp. If this lit your spark, subscribe to the LM Report. We're building a community to tackle tomorrow together. This is Lima, out till next time.